With all the growing calls for new homeschool regulations, a lot of parents are asking a pretty simple question. What are our rights? So today, we're going to break down a really powerful constitutional defense, not as some dry legal theory, but as a practical guide for understanding the clear lines the Constitution draws to protect families. It all really boils down to this one question. Who has the final say? Is it the parents who have this natural pre-existing authority? Or is it the state, which seems to be looking to expand its oversight? To really get a handle on the defense, first we have to understand the push for more control. See, this push for more state control over homeschooling isn't just a single proposal here and there. It's really a multi-front campaign. And a lot of the time, it moves super quickly and quietly, way outside of the public eye. For instance, policies are being reviewed by committees before the public even gets a chance to see what's in them. And that lack of transparency is a huge concern for the families who are going to be directly affected by all this. And then, on top of that, you've got bills being drafted with very, very limited public input. That means the voices of homeschooling families, well, they often aren't even part of the conversation when these new laws are being written. And this isn't all just happening inside government. You also have advocacy groups and NGOs applying some really intense pressure on legislators, pushing agendas that, frankly, don't always line up with the rights of parents. And here's a crucial point. We're seeing these emotionally charged, tragic stories being used as leverage to justify sweeping new powers over all homeschooling families. This happens even when the events they're talking about have absolutely nothing to do with homeschooling, and sometimes they actually point to failures within government agencies themselves. So, with all this pressure coming from all sides, where does the Constitution actually draw the line? Well, it all starts with a simple, foundational principle that pretty much defines the entire relationship between parents and the state. This right here, this is the core of the whole defense. Parental authority existed long before any government did. The Constitution doesn't give this right to parents, it just recognizes a right that was already there. Think about it. The government can't give you something it never had in the first place. And this flows directly from how our government is supposed to work, our system of enumerated powers. Go ahead, search the Constitution. You won't find a single word granting the government authority over a child's upbringing or their education. If that power isn't explicitly given, the government just doesn't have it, period. It can't invent it, and it can't just accept it from some outside group. Now, building on that foundation, we find 4 specific amendments that act like pillars, creating this constitutional fortress that protects parental rights. Let's walk through each one. It starts with the 9th Amendment. This one clarifies that just because a right isn't written down doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and parental authority is one of those core retained rights. Next up, the 10th Amendment, which reserves any powers not given to the federal government, to the states, or to the people. And since this authority was never given away, it stays with the people, the parents. Then you've got the First Amendment, which protects the very belief and conscience that are so central to home education. And finally, the Fourth Amendment protects the privacy of the home itself, which is, the main classroom for that education. Okay, so beyond those 4 big pillars, there's actually another layer to this defense. It's an argument that you almost never hear talked about when it comes to education, but believe me, it is incredibly powerful. Let's unpack what some call the hidden defense in the Constitution. So what is it? Well, it comes from an amendment you probably wouldn't expect to apply to education at all, but the logic here is really solid. It's the takings clause from the 5th Amendment. Now, I know what you're thinking. We usually think of this in terms of eminent domain, right? The government taking your land to build a highway. But the founders, they had a much, much broader definition of property. And this is where the argument gets really fascinating. James Madison, the guy who basically wrote the Constitution, argued for this much bigger view of property. He said we have a property interest in our rights, in our opinions, and in our liberty. They might be intangible, but they absolutely belong to us. And this is where it all clicks. If the state mandates curriculum or requires constant monitoring and basically replaces a parent's judgment with its own bureaucratic authority, well, isn't it effectively taking a private right, parental authority, and converting it into a public function? And since you can't possibly compensate someone for a priceless right like that, the Constitution says the government just can't seize it. Okay, so that's all the constitutional theory. But how do we turn that into practical tools you can actually use? Well, this whole framework builds into some really clear, confident statements that parents can use when they're talking to officials and lawmakers. This first one is both neutral and really powerful. It sets the default position, parents are responsible, and it correctly puts the burden of proof on the state, which has to go through full due process before it can interfere. The second statement takes on that narrative we talked about earlier, head on. It rejects this idea of collective punishment and correctly reframes the issue. The conversation should be about government accountability, not about taking away homeschool freedom. This one is a direct check on all that outside influence. It's a reminder to officials that their authority comes from one place and one place only, the Constitution, not from the recommendations or pressure of some advocacy group. And finally, this one grounds the entire conversation right back in the text of the Constitution itself. It's a firm declaration that, hey, raising children is fundamentally a parental right. It's not a function of the state. All right, so having these tools is one thing, using them is another. The final step is to turn all this knowledge into effective engagement. Here's a simple 5-point action plan to help you do just that. First, get informed, which, hey, is exactly what you're doing right now. Second, get visible. Show up at hearings and speak up. Third, get connected with other families. There is so much strength in numbers. Fourth, get ahead of the narrative by confidently challenging those false arguments. And finally, get confident. Know that the Constitution is on your side. You know, when you peel back all the layers, this all comes down to one fundamental question. This whole debate isn't just about homeschooling rules. It's about defining the proper relationship between the family and the state. It's about knowing where those constitutional boundaries are and having the confidence to stand up and defend them.